You think your neighbor is annoying? Try waking up after a 14-hour hospital shift to find a complete stranger parked in your private driveway, like she owns it. And that was just the beginning. Meet Jason Miller, ER nurse by night, suburban peacekeeper by day, who thought a polite note on a windshield would solve a simple parking mix-up. Instead, he unleashed a full-scale war with Karen, the self-declared queen of Maplewood Lane. From crumpled notes to courtroom battles, from fake petitions to community-used cones in his front yard, this isn't just a parking dispute. It's a masterclass in petty suburban warfare. And just when you think it's over, Karen moves zip codes. This is the true story of boundary lines crossed, legal limits tested, and the tow truck driver who became a local legend. If you love real drama, neighborhood chaos, and a whole lot of passive-aggressive energy, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Because at Real HOA Drama, we don't just spill the tea, we tow it. Let the driveway war begin. After 14 hours straight in the ER stitching up everything from bar fights to bike wrecks, all Jason Miller wanted was a cold glass of orange juice, 2 Tylenol, and a nap deep enough to forget his own name. The sun was barely rising over Maplewood Lane as he turned onto a street, already dreaming of collapsing into his couch and pretending he didn't exist for the next 8 hours. But the universe had other plans. Sitting smugly in the center of his driveway, mind you, was a car Jason didn't recognize. A silver SUV with pink bumper stickers and a license plate frame that read, "I brake for drama." The irony was almost poetic. At first, Jason thought maybe it was a guest from next door, someone who got confused. It happened, right? So he parked his old Toyota on the street, a miracle in itself, given how packed the curbs usually were, took a deep breath and reminded himself, "We choose peace today." He scribbled a polite note on a yellow Post-it and stuck it under the windshield wiper. "Hi there. Just a heads up. This is a private driveway. Please don't park here again. Thanks and have a great day." Simple. Kind. Unmistakable. He trudged into his house, collapsed on the couch still wearing scrubs, and was unconscious in seconds. The next morning, Jason opened his front door in flip-flops and a hoodie to grab the paper. Yes, he still read an actual newspaper. Judge him later. That's when he noticed the Post-it. Not on the car. Not on the windshield. It was crumpled up and thrown unceremoniously into the hydrangea bush like a piece of trash. And the car? Still there. Parked like it paid rent. Jason rubbed his temples. The headache that no amount of Tylenol could fix was back. This time, he grabbed a notepad and wrote something firmer. Private property. Final warning. Do not park in this driveway. Violators may be towed. He didn't sign it. This was war now. As he was taping the note to the windshield, he heard a voice behind him that carried the unmistakable tone of, "I have never been told no in my life. You know, you don't have to be so dramatic. It's just a driveway." Jason turned around, and there she was, her mid-50s, perfectly teased blonde bob that defied physics, a pair of sunglasses too big for her face, and an attitude that could curdle milk. "You must be Karen," Jason said calmly, though his blood pressure was approaching dangerous levels. She huffed. "I only park here because the street is a nightmare." "What's the harm?" Jason counted to 5. "Well, for starters, it's my driveway. My wife gets home from work in 30 minutes and won't be able to park. And my father visits every Wednesday. He uses a walker." Karen crossed her arms and gave a one-shoulder shrug. "Maybe if you weren't so territorial, this neighborhood would feel more like a community." Jason blinked. A community doesn't mean stealing your neighbor's space. "Oh, please. You act like I keyed your car. It's just a patch of cement." Jason opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no winning here. Not today. "Look," he said, voice steady. "I'm asking nicely. Don't park here again." Karen rolled her eyes, climbed into her car like she was doing him a favor, and drove off in a cloud of righteous indignation. Jason exhaled, half laughing, half fuming. He had no idea this was just the first battle of what would become a full-blown suburban saga. The driveway drama had begun, and Karen had just declared war. Jason had dealt with drunk patients, screaming toddlers, and one guy who tried to perform his own stitches using fishing line, but nothing prepared him for Karen on day 2. He woke up to the gentle hum of birds outside and a rare, precious feeling. Optimism. Maybe she'd gotten the message. Maybe decency had prevailed. Spoiler alert, it hadn't. As Jason opened the blinds, his jaw clenched. There it was again. The silver SUV. Same parking job. Same shameless audacity. But now it wasn't just in the driveway, it was blocking the garage completely. Like she was daring him to challenge her. Jason walked outside, and that's when he saw it. The note, the second one, the final warning, was now balled up like a bad report card and tossed into the bushes again. This time it was soggy from the sprinklers. It looked like it had been stomped on for good measure. Jason bent down, picked it up, and stared at the wet paper like it personally insulted his ancestors. Then, like every man pushed to his limit while still wearing pajama pants, he made a decision. No more notes. No more conversations. Today we tow. He whipped out his phone and called the number from a towing sign he remembered seeing at the edge of the neighborhood strip mall. Yeah, I need a removal. Private property. Vehicle is blocking access to my garage. The dispatcher on the other end didn't even blink. We'll send Rick. He knows the drill. That sentence alone told Jason all he needed to know. 30 minutes later, a rumbling diesel engine echoed down the street like a war horn. Rick, a burly guy with a red beard and a "Don't Tread on Me" bumper sticker, pulled up in a tow truck that looked like it could move a small plane. He hopped out, gave Jason a knowing nod, and surveyed the scene. "Let me guess," Rick said, grinning. "Karen?" Jason raised an eyebrow. "You know her?" Rick chuckled, already chaining up the tires. "Oh yeah. She's a repeat offender. Tried to block a fire hydrant once because her yoga class ran long." Jason couldn't help but laugh. "You're a national hero, Rick." "Just doing God's work," Rick replied, tightening the hook like a cowboy prepping for a rodeo. Minutes later, the SUV was loaded, locked, and rolling down the street, like an ex that finally got blocked for good. Jason let out a deep, primal sigh. Satisfaction washed over him. It was like watching karma pull into the driveway with a badge and a flatbed. But just as the sun began to set and peace seemed restored, the calm shattered. The sound of heels, sharp, stomping, and furious, came from across the street. Karen. She looked like a woman on the edge of a Lifetime movie. Phone in hand, purse flailing, hair slightly off-kilter in a way that made her even more dangerous. "You," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Jason like he was the villain in a soap opera. Jason sipped from his iced tea, trying to channel his inner Clint Eastwood. "Afternoon. Where's my car?" Jason raised his cup. "Probably halfway to the impound lot by now." Karen gasped like he'd set fire to the Constitution. "You had to know, right? This is illegal. This is harassment. This is private property," Jason cut in. "Remember?" She was pacing now, flustered, muttering things like "unbelievable" and "calling my lawyer." Jason had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from smiling. Karen stormed back into her house like a toddler denied screen time. Jason stood there, calm as a summer breeze, already feeling the tension lifting from his shoulders. What he didn't know yet was that this was just the opening act of the Karen Chronicles. And tomorrow? Tomorrow would be worse. Sunday morning in Maplewood Lane was usually quiet. The kind of quiet where neighbors mowed their lawns with earbuds in, kids rode scooters in crooked lines, and the most exciting thing was a squirrel knocking over a bird feeder. But not today. Jason was sitting on his porch, sipping coffee and feeling the sweet afterglow of petty justice. He had just returned from the night shift at the hospital, and watching Karen's SUV get towed yesterday felt like poetic compensation for 12 hours of nonstop chaos. Life was good. Until the squad car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, one tall and tired-looking, the other shorter with a kind of face that said, "Why is this my problem?" And there she was, storming across the lawn like she was auditioning for a legal drama. Karen, clutching her purse like it was evidence and her phone like it was a badge. She pointed at Jason as if he were a fugitive on the run. "That's him." That's the man who harassed me and stole my car. Jason blinked. Stole. The taller officer sighed. Ma'am, are you saying he committed theft? Karen placed her hand on her chest like she was performing in a courtroom monologue. He had my vehicle towed. No warning. No conversation. Just gone. Jason raised an eyebrow and stood up slowly, calm as a cat in the sun. Officers, I've got all the receipts. Literally. He motioned toward his phone, and within seconds had pulled up a time-stamped video from his brand-new security cam. Photos of the car parked squarely in front of the garage. A snapshot of the crumpled note in the bushes. And, cherry on top, the towing invoice with time and date. The shorter cop glanced at Karen. Ma'am, were you parked in his driveway? Karen huffed. The street was full. What was I supposed to do? Drive in circles like an idiot? Jason fought back a grin. The officer didn't. Private driveways, the taller officer said, are not for public use. Unless he gave you permission, he's within his rights to tow. Karen's mouth fell open. She stammered, opened and closed her hands like she was trying to summon an argument out of thin air. I live in this neighborhood, she finally snapped. I deserve respect. This isn't an HOA issue, the officer replied, clearly over it. This is trespassing. Again, unless you have permission to park on his property, you're in the wrong. Jason crossed his arms. I tried the polite route. Twice. Got ignored. Got disrespected. Got blocked in. So yeah, I called a tow truck. And I do it again. Karen's face turned a shade of red not found in nature. You haven't seen the last of me, she hissed like a cartoon villain. The officers exchanged a look like they'd been here before. Too many times. Ma'am, the shorter one said, flipping his notebook shut, don't park in his driveway. Simple as that. If you do, and he calls us again, we won't be coming for him. Karen stood there, fuming. Then she spun on her heel and stomped back across the street, muttering something about lawsuits and neighborhood bullies. As the patrol car drove away, Jason sat back down, picked up his mug, and gave a little wave in her direction. Bless your heart, he murmured into his coffee. But deep down, he knew. Karen wasn't done. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By Tuesday, the neighborhood was buzzing. Not from lawnmowers or leaf blowers, but from the unmistakable sound of suburban gossip taking flight. Jason thought things might finally be winding down. Karen had been humiliated in front of the police. Her car was probably still sitting at the impound lot, and for the first time in days, his driveway was blissfully empty. But peace, as it turned out, was just the eye of the Karen storm. That morning, as Jason stepped outside to get the mail, he noticed something stuck to his front door, neatly folded, written on monogrammed stationery, and sealed with an actual wax stamp. Who even owns those anymore? It read, Dear neighbor, your recent behavior has been disappointing and disruptive to the harmony of our community. Several neighbors share my concern that you are unwilling to cooperate and show basic neighborly courtesy. I sincerely hope you will reconsider your stance before this matter must escalate further. With concern, Karen Reynolds, proud resident, Maplewood Lane. Jason stared at the letter like it had been written in Klingon. This wasn't just passive-aggressive, it was Olympic-level shade, with a hint of dictatorship. Later that evening, curiosity and caffeine got the better of him. He walked down the street, stopping by a few familiar porches. If Karen really was recruiting an army of allies, it was time to take the temperature of the town. First up, Sarah Jenkins, next-door neighbor, retired teacher, and unofficial mayor of Maplewood Lane. Jason knocked. She opened the door, holding a glass of red wine and wearing a live, laugh, leave me alone t-shirt. Jason, she said with a smile. Let me guess, Karen? She left me a letter. Sarah snorted. She left everyone a letter. Jason raised an eyebrow. She say anything interesting? She tried to guilt-trip me into signing a petition to restore civility. Said you were setting a dangerous precedent by calling the cops on neighbors. Jason blinked. I'm the danger now. Sarah took a long sip of wine. She also told me she used to be HOA president. Until, of course, She tried to ban inflatable Christmas decorations and told the Johnsons their wind chimes were oral pollution. That explained a lot. At the corner house, Mr. Patel, who maintained the most immaculate lawn on the block, offered Jason a knowing nod. "She parked in my driveway last year," he said. "I was too polite to say anything. Regret it every day since." Another neighbor, Amy, who ran a daycare out of her home, added, "She reported me to the city once because the kids were too cheerful during nap time." Can you imagine? Jason chuckled. "So, she's not exactly building a movement?" Amy laughed. "More like a comedy club." By the end of the evening, Jason had spoken with 6 neighbors, and every single one had a Karen story, ranging from irritating to downright bizarre. Apparently, during her brief reign as HOA president, she tried to enforce a uniform mulch color policy and once called pest control because someone hung a hummingbird feeder too close to her fence. The illusion of Karen as some righteous community crusader was crumbling fast. Back home, Jason looked at the fancy letter again, this time with a smirk. If Karen wanted a neighborhood uprising, she was going to have to fight it solo. Because Maplewood Lane? Maplewood Lane was done with Karen. It was Saturday morning, and the air smelled like fresh-cut grass and mild resentment. Jason was just about to enjoy his coffee on the porch, his new weekend ritual ever since regaining driveway dominance, when he noticed a familiar shape striding up the sidewalk. Clipboard in hand, hair helmeted into its usual immovable swirl of blonde. Sunglasses perched on the tip of her nose like she was preparing to interrogate the HOA board of a gated community in Scottsdale.
Karen.
She looked like a politician on the campaign trail, minus the handshake etiquette and plus a purse that could double as a medieval weapon. Jason squinted as she stopped at the Jenkins porch, offering a syrupy smile that could rot wood. "Hi, neighbor," she chirped. "Do you have just a second to sign a community petition? It's about restoring civility and protecting homeowner rights." Translation: Help me punish Jason for defending his own driveway. From his porch across the street, Jason sipped his coffee and watched the drama unfold like it was live theater. A one-woman show called Delusions of Grandeur, The Karen Chronicles. He saw Sarah open the door, take one look at the clipboard, and tilt her head with the same expression she gave her students when they tried to turn in homework covered in ketchup. "I'll think about it," Sarah said with the polite finality of someone who absolutely would not be thinking about it. Undeterred, Karen marched on. House after house. Smile after fake smile. Clipboard always clutched tight to her chest like it contained the Constitution, and not a tantrum on paper. Jason watched as she knocked on Mr. Patel's door. He didn't even open it, just waved her off through the blinds while watering his roses. She tried the Martinez's. No answer. Tried Amy, the daycare owner, who answered the door with a baby on one hip and a phone in the other, clearly too busy keeping toddlers alive to engage in driveway diplomacy. And yet, Karen carried herself like a woman on a winning streak. After 2 hours of absolutely no visible signatures, she looped back toward her house, head held high, looking, if anything, smugger than before. Jason shook his head in disbelief. That's when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Sarah, just a heads up. Karen came by with that petition. Nobody's signing. But she's telling people it's going really well. Honestly, she's losing it." Jason laughed so loud he startled a squirrel on the porch railing. He replied, "Jason, should I start a counter-petition to ban clipboards?" Sarah sent back a laughing emoji followed by, "Sarah, at this point I'd sign it twice." That night, as Jason walked the dog, he passed by Karen's house. The living room lights were on. Through the window, he could see her pacing, holding the clipboard, talking to someone on speakerphone with wild hand gestures, probably claiming the neighborhood was rising up or some other revolution that existed only in her head. For someone who had 0 signatures, Karen sure acted like she was leading a political movement. But Jason wasn't fooled. And neither was the neighborhood. The petition was just another chapter in Karen's spiral, a paper-thin attempt to paint herself as the victim in a war she started, lost, and couldn't let go of. And deep down, Jason knew this wasn't the end.
No.
Karen wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat. She was the kind who'd build a cardboard throne on top of an anthill and call it a kingdom. And Jason? He was just the guy who dared to put up a no parking sign in her imaginary empire. Jason had just come back from the grocery store with a carton of eggs, a loaf of sourdough, and the innocent belief that maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally moved on. That illusion shattered the moment he turned into a street and nearly drove into two bright orange traffic cones planted squarely in front of his driveway. Not next to, not nearby,
In the
middle of
his driveway.
And if that wasn't enough of a red flag, there was also a cheap plastic yard sign wedged between them, flapping slightly in the wind. Taped to it with painter's tape and righteous fury was a handwritten note in bold Sharpie. This driveway is now reserved for community use. Violators will be reported. Maplewood Lane Citizens Committee. Jason stared at it for a solid 10 seconds, wondering if he'd stepped into a suburban version of the Twilight Zone. Community use? Did she think his driveway was a public library? A park bench? And the kicker? There was no Maplewood Lane Citizens Committee. Unless you counted Karen, her clipboard, and the bottle of Chardonnay she probably sipped while writing that nonsense. He parked on the street, again, and stepped out of the car slowly, like a detective arriving at a crime scene. His neighbor Sarah peeked out from behind her blinds like she was watching an episode of Real Housewives, HOA edition. Jason didn't say a word. He just walked up to the cones, pulled out his phone, and started snapping pictures. Wide shots. Close-ups. Angled like he was submitting evidence for a trial because, honestly, that wasn't off the table anymore. He looked at the cones. Then the sign. Then the cones again. And without a single ounce of hesitation, he picked up the whole mess, cones, sign, flapping sharp a note, and marched across the street like a man on a mission. Karen's lawn was perfectly mowed. Too perfect. Suspiciously perfect. Which made it even more satisfying when Jason chucked the cones right onto her grass like he was delivering a pizza of petty justice. The sign landed face down next to her flower bed, the word community, now smeared with dirt. He clapped his hands clean and walked back across the street. But before heading inside, Jason did one more thing. He pulled out his phone again, this time to call the non-emergency police line. Hi. Yes, I'd like to report a trespassing and unauthorized obstruction of a private driveway. No, it's not an emergency, but it will be if she escalates. The dispatcher sounded both amused and unsurprised. We've had a few calls from your area recently. Jason nodded. I'm not shocked. They told him to file a formal report if it happened again, and that officers would be informed in case future action was needed. He hung up, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Karen had gone from entitled parker to self-declared driveway dictator. She wasn't just ignoring boundaries, she was now actively inventing her own. Later that evening, Jason texted Sarah a photo of the cones crumpled on Karen's lawn with the caption, Jason, Maplewood Lane Citizens Committee meeting adjourned. Sarah replied instantly, Sarah, next time bring donuts. They both knew it was far from over. Karen was many things, obnoxious, entitled, creatively delusional, but she wasn't a quitter. And if this was her idea of a ceasefire, Jason had better stock up on popcorn. And maybe more cones. Jason had reached that point of suburban enlightenment where every problem has a 3-step solution and a Home Depot receipt. After weeks of dealing with Karen's chaos, cone invasions, fake petitions, and moral crusades written in Sharpie, he decided it was time to stop playing defense. No more waiting around for the next storm. It was time to build the levee. Step 1: Surveillance. He mounted a motion-activated security camera above the garage, complete with night vision, cloud backup, and a sticker that read, Smile. You're being recorded because nothing says leave me alone like polite digital threats. Step 2: Signage. Jason had a new sign custom-made from a local print shop. It was no longer a scribbled note or a passive warning. It was bold, it was red, and it was law. Private driveway, no parking. Violators will be towed at owner's expense. Surveillance in progress. He didn't even flinch when he hammered it into the lawn. He just stood back and admired it like a proud dad watching his kid score a touchdown. Step 3. Call Rick. Rick, the unspoken MVP of this saga, picked up on the first ring. "Let me guess," he said. "She's back." "Not yet," Jason replied. "But she will be." Rick chuckled. "I'll keep the truck warm." It was the suburban version of calling in the National Guard. And like clockwork, 2 days later, around 4:45 p.m., Jason's phone buzzed with a motion alert. He opened the app. There she was,
Karen.
pulling into his driveway again like it was a VIP valet lane. She parked, got out, adjusted her sunglasses like a Bond villain, then walked off toward her house like nothing had happened. Jason didn't even sigh this time. He just opened his contact list and tapped Rick's number like he was calling in an airstrike. 25 minutes later, the familiar rumble of Rick's tow truck rolled down Maplewood Lane like Judgment Day in diesel form. Rick barely needed instructions. By now, he could tow Karen's car with his eyes closed. The chains clanked, the hydraulic lift groaned, and just like that, Karen's SUV was airborne again. And this time, Jason watched it all happen from his porch, sipping a sparkling water like a smug Bond villain himself. But of course, the peace didn't last. 10 minutes later, a high-pitched screech echoed down the street. Karen came running, waving her arms like a distressed flight attendant. "What did you do?" she shrieked, staring in horror at the now-empty driveway. Jason stood, slow and deliberate. "Didn't you see the sign?" "You're insane," she barked. "This is harassment. This is emotional trauma. I have rights." "Actually," Jason replied coolly, "I have a camera, a no parking sign, and a lawyer on speed dial."
Karen gasped.
"You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I'm filing a civil suit. You've inflicted psychological damage and public humiliation." Jason couldn't help himself. "Then I guess you shouldn't have parked so publicly." Karen let out a frustrated wail, stomped back to her house, and slammed the door with enough force to rattle nearby wind chimes. Later that evening, Jason got a text from Rick. "Rick, she called the impound lot and said you're unhinged. We offered her a discount punch card." Jason replied, "Jason, 5th toes free?" They both laughed. But beneath the humor, Jason knew Karen was spiraling. And people like Karen, people who can't accept defeat, don't go quietly. She was planning something. And next time, it wouldn't be cones or clipboards. It'd be war. If there's one thing Jason had learned about Karen Reynolds, it was this. She didn't back down. She didn't reflect. She didn't self-correct. No, Karen doubled down. So it came as no surprise when an official envelope arrived in Jason's mailbox 2 weeks after the second tow. Thick paper, big bold letters, and just enough legal jargon to make it irritating. Small claims court, notice of civil action. The charge? Harassment, targeted hostility, and intentional emotional distress inflicted upon a fellow resident of Maplewood Lane. In other words, he made Karen sad. Jason read it 3 times, then set it on the kitchen table next to his coffee and muttered, "She actually did it. She weaponized feelings." Emily, his wife, glanced over. "Let me guess, she forgot that trespassing is still illegal in 2025? Jason shook his head. "Oh no. She just thinks if she talks long enough in a courtroom, logic will surrender out of exhaustion." Still, he wasn't about to go in unprepared. Court day, Maplewood County Civil Hall, 10 a.m. Jason walked in wearing a button-down shirt, khakis, and the calm demeanor of someone holding all the cards. He carried a manila folder with time-stamped security camera footage, photos of the cones, the sign, the blocked garage, copies of both towing receipts, and 6 signed statements from neighbors all titled, "I, too, have suffered at the hands of Karen Reynolds." Karen, on the other hand, strutted in with the theatrical flair of someone who watched too much Judge Judy. She wore a power blazer, carried a red leather binder, and had her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. When the judge called them up, Karen launched into a monologue so dramatic it could have earned her a daytime Emmy. "Your Honor," she began, "this man has targeted me. He's humiliated me, twice towed my car, and turned the neighborhood against me. I now suffer from anxiety, sleep disruption, and social alienation. He even encouraged gossip behind my back. Jason blinked.
Gossip?
This was suburban America. Gossip was a sport here. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you have evidence of harassment? Karen fumbled. Well, not in writing, but... The judge cut her off. Let's hear from the defendant. Jason stepped forward, calm and clear. He presented the camera footage first, Karen parking in his driveway, twice, ignoring signs, ignoring warnings. Then the photos. The community use sign. The cones. The blocked garage. Finally, he handed over the written statements from neighbors. Every page was a mini Karen memoir. Accusations of trespassing, noise complaints, even the infamous Christmas decoration ban of 2021. The judge leafed through the folder in silence, then slowly looked up at Karen. Ms. Reynolds, you knowingly parked on private property without permission, multiple times. The defendant issued warnings, installed signage, and presented reasonable evidence. I see no signs of harassment, only enforcement of property rights. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the judge wasn't done. In fact, had the defendant chosen to press charges for trespassing, he would have had grounds to do so. Jason tried not to smile.
Tried.
Karen, flushed with indignation and something close to defeat, mumbled under her breath, "This neighborhood's gone to hell." The judge raised an eyebrow. Perhaps, Ms. Reynolds, but not because of him. Case dismissed. Jason gathered his papers, gave a polite nod to the clerk, and walked out like a man finally putting a long, ridiculous chapter behind him. Outside the courthouse, Rick had texted. Rick, heard Karen tried the legal route. How'd it go? Jason replied. Jason, she lost. Judge almost thanked me. Rick, you win a free tow. Just say when. It started with a joke. Jason had just finished mowing the lawn when Sarah Jenkins strolled by with her rescue dog, Biscuit. She paused, smiled, and said, "You know, folks are starting to call your driveway the Karen Zone." Jason blinked. Seriously? Sarah chuckled. Dead serious. It's become local lore. The kids made up a whole game around it. Something about avoiding the Karen trap on the sidewalk. By the end of the week, 3 different neighbors had made offhand comments about it. Amy from down the block brought over a plate of cookies and quipped, "Saw a car slow down in front of your house today, but then they kept going. I think the sign scared them." The legend grows. It wasn't just a nickname anymore. It was a warning label with street cred. Jason couldn't walk to his mailbox without someone giving him a knowing nod, a thumbs up, or his personal favorite murmuring, "Justice lives here." And as if summoned by the spirit of poetic timing, Rick, the tow truck savior of Maplewood Lane, pulled up in his diesel chariot the next day, not on a job, just for a visit. Jason raised an eyebrow as Rick stepped out holding a thermos. What? No SUVs to tow today? Rick grinned. Nah. I was in the area and figured I'd check on the most famous driveway in the county. They sat on the porch like war vets swapping stories, sipping coffee and enjoying the calm. You know, Rick said, glancing across the street, she's infamous in more than just your neighborhood. Jason tilted his head.
Oh.
Rick leaned in like he was telling a ghost story. Last year, she tried to get a speed bump removed because it made her car feel disrespected. Another time, she called animal control on a guy's therapy dog because it barked during yoga. Jason choked on his coffee. You're joking. Swear on my jumper cables, Rick said. I've towed her car from 5 different addresses. Same pattern every time. Entitlement, confrontation, and a very dramatic exit. Jason whistled. She's like a one-woman HOA horror movie. Rick laughed. More like The Fast and the Passive-Aggressive. Across the street, Karen's blinds fluttered slightly. They both saw it. She was watching, but no longer storming. No yelling, no strutting across the lawn in protest heels. Just silence. Rick nudged him. She doesn't say anything to you anymore? Jason shook his head. Not a word. She avoids eye contact like I'm contagious.
Rick nodded.
You've achieved suburban dominance. You should get a flag or something. They sat for a while in comfortable silence. Jason looked at his driveway, clean, peaceful, Karen-free, and felt a kind of quiet pride you don't usually associate with concrete. What started as a simple need for space had turned into something more. A reminder that boundaries matter, that standing your ground doesn't always mean yelling louder, but being ready, clear, and calmly unshakable. Karen's SUV hadn't returned since the courtroom loss. Her clipboards were nowhere to be seen. And while she still lived across the street, her reign of driveway terror had ended, not with a bang, but with a slow, silent retreat. The Karen zone wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a monument.
A myth.
A suburban legend with Rick as its folk hero and Jason as its reluctant king. For the first time in weeks, life on Maplewood Lane was calm. The sun rose each morning without the blinding reflection of Karen's SUV on Jason's windshield. The only things parked in the driveway now were Jason's sensible Toyota and Emily's hybrid, both exactly where they belonged.
No cones.
No clipboards. No handmade signs declaring community rights. Just quiet. Jason and Emily finally had their home back. They no longer had to peek out the window before pulling into the garage, or flinch at the sound of heels echoing off the pavement. They slept better, laughed more. Jason even planted some shrubs along the driveway, his way of reclaiming the space with life. Sarah joked that he should install a plaque. Here lies the battlefield formerly known as the Karen Zone. May she rest elsewhere. Even Karen had seemingly accepted defeat. Her blinds stayed closed, and she kept her distance. Sometimes Jason would catch a glimpse of her in the backyard, pruning her roses with the intensity of a woman trying to regain control over something, anything. But she never spoke. She never parked in his driveway again. And eventually, the neighborhood stopped whispering about her altogether. It was peace. Real peace. And Jason soaked in every second of it.
Until the weekend.
Jason and Emily had planned a simple Saturday brunch with his younger brother Ben and Ben's new wife, Claire, who just moved into a cozy suburban cul-de-sac about 20 minutes outside the city. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked like it had been assembled from a Hallmark movie set. Pastel houses, mailboxes with little flags, and golden retrievers trotting next to strollers. As Jason pulled up to the curb in front of Ben's house, he smiled. Driveway wide open.
No cones. No threats.
No signs. Just bliss. But then he looked across the street. His smile faded. There, in the driveway opposite Ben's, lined perfectly between two flower pots, was a familiar silver SUV. The same pink bumper sticker. The same license plate frame that read, "I brake for drama." Jason blinked. And then the front door opened. And out stepped the unmistakable helmet of hair, the oversized sunglasses, and the purse he knew better than his own lunchbox.
Karen.
Jason froze like he'd seen a ghost. She didn't notice him.
Not yet.
She was busy yelling at a teenager on a scooter for riding too freely. Same attitude. New zip code. Emily, still in the passenger seat, followed his gaze and groaned.
No.
Freaking way. Jason slowly reached for his coffee, took a long, reflective sip, and sighed. Guess this neighborhood's about to learn what a driveway war feels like. Emily shook her head. You gonna warn Ben? Jason watched Karen gesture dramatically at the teenager, her voice rising as she pointed toward the curb.
He smirked.
Nah, he said, eyes narrowing. Let's give it 1 week. And with that, Jason leaned back in his seat, smiled into the rearview mirror, and muttered, Well, looks like the driveway war just moved zip codes.